This is how Scrum works at a glance. We start with a plan to do a delivery in what we call a sprint, that is a fixed time box of, for instance, 2 weeks. Most of the teams prefer 1 week or 2 weeks. The idea is to keep the sprint length constant. Once a team decides to go with 2 weeks, they don't change it unless there is a very good reason. When the team completes the delivery, they reflect and adapt, and they start the cycle again. So far, this is not very different from the Deming wheel, known as Plan, Do, Check, Act. But let's look into more details to the events, accountabilities, and artifacts added by Scrum. To plan, we need to consider a strategic view and a short-term goal defined in sprint planning. At a more strategic level, there will be a vision or product goal and a product backlog, which is basically a wish list with everything that we would like for the product. The product backlog contains product backlog items. The most valuable items are usually on the top. The product backlog is maintained by the product owner. The sprint planning is the first event of the sprint, where the Scrum team, composed by a product owner, developers, and Scrum Master, meets to decide which items of the product backlog can be done in the sprint. Usually, these are the items on the top of the product backlog, and they are added to the sprint backlog according to a sprint goal. However, because the developers are about to take a commitment to the sprint goal, they need to forecast how much work they can complete during the sprint. To do this, they consider their past performance on building similar items and their capacity for the sprint. The sprint backlog is just a new backlog that contains only the items that will be developed within the sprint. The sprint backlog is just a forecast, not a promise. As any forecast, it can fail, but if you fail in a 2-week plan, the impact will be much less than failing in a 6-month plan. Once the items for the sprint are selected, they set a sprint goal, and developers discuss how to build those items, and they split the items into smaller units of work, usually called tasks. After that, the developers start working, and they meet every day in an event called Daily Scrum to check their progress against the sprint goal and take corrective actions during the day. They do this every day, managing their own progress until the end of the sprint. Hopefully, they are done with all the items. In order to say that the product backlog items are done, they need to meet the quality standards defined in the definition of done. At this point, the Scrum team will reflect and adapt about the sprint in 2 ways: regarding the product in an event called Sprint Review, and regarding the team effectiveness in an event called Retrospective. During the sprint review, they take a look at the result of the sprint, which is a usable and valuable product increment that is the same product of every sprint, but now with the new features described in the items of the sprint backlog. This product is ready to be released if that is needed and requested by the product owner. They will show it to the stakeholders, collaborate with them on the next steps, and receive feedback. As a result of the feedback, the product owner will update the product backlog. Some items that didn't seem important have more priority now. Others are less important, and there might be new ideas or changes that are added to the backlog. In the retrospective, the team says what went well, what needs to improve, and define actions for improvement for the next sprint. During the sprint, the product owner, in collaboration with the Scrum team, will also update the product backlog in an ongoing activity called Product Backlog Refinement.